Jasmine Crockett's fearless confrontation of Pam Bondi highlights the danger of Fox News-driven narratives and their role in fueling political threats, and this moment did not simply arise from a personal clash but from a deeper tension that has been building for years in American politics. Crockett is a lawmaker who has become known for her unapologetic tone, her refusal to back down in the face of hostility, and her willingness to call out what she sees as unfair treatment of her colleagues and her party. In this fiery exchange, she tapped into the frustrations of many who believe Fox News has played a decisive role in inflaming partisan divides and giving cover to harmful rhetoric. Her response to Pam Bondi became more than a political soundbite, it became a symbolic rejection of the media-fueled intimidation that often shapes public discourse in the United States. The confrontation is particularly significant because it underscores how narratives created and amplified by Fox News have become a political weapon. For years, the network has cultivated a loyal base of viewers through programming that often leans into sensationalism, fear-driven storytelling, and pointed attacks on Democratic leaders. Figures like Pam Bondi, who have aligned themselves with Fox News, benefit from the network's vast influence and its ability to frame issues in ways that reinforce a particular partisan perspective. Crockett's response drew attention to this phenomenon by pointing out how such narratives are not harmless commentary but fuel a cycle of hostility that can spill into real threats against elected officials, journalists, and even ordinary citizens who dissent from those viewpoints. What makes Crockett's pushback so compelling is that she speaks not just as a politician but also as a lawyer who understands the stakes of unchecked rhetoric. Her legal background gives her words weight, because she knows firsthand how dangerous it can be when misinformation and politically charged framing are allowed to dominate the national conversation. When she turned her energy toward Bondi, she was doing more than challenging a political opponent, she was exposing the machinery behind her, the media apparatus that shapes the public's perception and, in many cases, distorts it. She did so with fire and clarity, making it impossible for anyone watching to dismiss her argument as mere partisan bickering. The danger of Fox News-driven narratives is that they normalize extremism while presenting it as mainstream debate. When hosts or guests imply that certain politicians are threats to the nation, or when they amplify conspiracies that paint opponents as corrupt or un-American, they do more than entertain an audience, they legitimize anger and suspicion. That anger often manifests in the form of threats, harassment, and even violence against public figures. Crockett's passionate takedown of Bondi highlighted this connection, pointing to the very real consequences that emerge when media-driven outrage becomes fuel for intimidation. Another aspect of Crockett's confrontation that deserves attention is her fearlessness. In an environment where many politicians are cautious with their words, worried about soundbites being used against them, she chose the opposite path. She leaned into her outrage, raised her voice, and spoke with intensity, signaling that she was not afraid of the consequences. That courage resonated with her supporters because it reflected their own exhaustion with a system that often seems tilted in favor of those who shout the loudest without regard for truth. By channeling that anger, Crockett became a voice for those who feel marginalized or misrepresented by the narratives pumped out on Fox News every night. Pam Bondi's role in this clash is also important to understand. As a former Florida Attorney General and a vocal supporter of Donald Trump, she has been a frequent presence on Fox News, where she often defends conservative talking points and attacks Democrats. To Crockett, Bondi represents more than just a political rival, she embodies the way Fox News gives legitimacy to voices that many feel perpetuate misinformation and hypocrisy. Crockett's decision to confront her so directly was not just personal, it was strategic. By going after Bondi, she was going after the larger media ecosystem that props up her views and amplifies them to millions. The fearlessness Crockett displayed also challenges the assumption that Democrats must always play defense in the face of conservative attacks. For years, many Democratic politicians have tried to take the high road, focusing on policy rather than getting caught up in media wars. But Crockett's rant demonstrated that sometimes, the most effective way to break through the noise is to meet the intensity of those attacks head-on. Her performance was a reminder that passion, when paired with substance, can cut through the clutter and capture the public's attention in ways that measured statements often cannot. It is worth noting that Crockett's confrontation did not exist in a vacuum. It came against the backdrop of escalating political tensions, where members of Congress routinely face threats to their safety, where misinformation spreads rapidly online, and where partisan media plays a critical role in deepening those divides. In this context, her fiery words were not only justified but necessary to highlight the urgency of the problem. She reminded viewers that the stakes are not just about partisan bickering, they are about the health of democracy and the ability of elected officials to serve without fear of harassment or violence. Crockett's takedown also served as a call to accountability for Fox News itself. By pointing out the ways the network's narratives fuel hostility, she was demanding that the media be held to a higher standard. While Fox News presents itself as a legitimate news organization, critics argue that much of its programming crosses the line into propaganda, designed to stoke division rather than inform. Crockett's confrontation was, in effect, a demand that the public recognize this difference and challenge it. Her speech further illuminated how Fox News thrives on framing Democratic figures as villains while excusing or downplaying similar behavior from Republicans. This double standard not only distorts the truth but also creates an environment where threats against certain politicians are normalized or even encouraged. Crockett's refusal to let Bondi or the network off the hook was a direct challenge to this hypocrisy. She named it, confronted it, and exposed it in front of an audience that could not look away. Ultimately, the confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Pam Bondi is a microcosm of the larger battle over truth, accountability, and the role of media in American politics. By standing up so fiercely, Crockett highlighted the dangers of letting Fox News-driven narratives go unchallenged, showing how they can escalate beyond rhetoric into real-world consequences. Her fearless approach in taking on Bondi reflected not just a clash of two personalities, but a broader struggle over who controls the narrative, who gets to define what is true, and how those definitions shape the nation's political climate. The hypocrisy within the GOP is exposed through double standards on accountability, ethics, and the selective use of outrage, and this is one of the central themes that Jasmine Crockett amplified when addressing the clash with Pam Bondi and the broader conservative media landscape. When we talk about hypocrisy in politics, it is not a matter of small contradictions or minor lapses, rather, it is about systemic patterns in which one side applies a strict set of standards to its opponents while conveniently ignoring those same principles when its own members are implicated. Crockett's fiery words struck at this exact inconsistency, pointing out how Republicans often portray themselves as the party of law and order, morality, and patriotism while excusing or dismissing behavior among their ranks that violates those very ideals. This duplicity, when exposed so directly, reveals much about the nature of modern political battles and the erosion of trust that results from these constant double standards. One of the most glaring areas where GOP hypocrisy becomes visible is in the realm of accountability. For years, Republicans have positioned themselves as defenders of ethics and integrity, demanding investigations, resignations, or punishments for Democratic figures accused of wrongdoing. Yet, when members of their own party face credible allegations, whether related to corruption, abuse of power, or blatant disregard for democratic norms, the response is often silence, deflection, or outright defense. Crockett's criticism landed with force because it illuminated how this inconsistency is not just rhetorical, it undermines the credibility of the entire political process. People see that accountability is only demanded when it benefits one side, and that realization chips away at the legitimacy of the institutions Republicans claim to protect. Take, for example, the stark differences in how the GOP reacted to investigations involving Democrats compared to their defense of Donald Trump during multiple controversies. While they demanded exhaustive scrutiny of opponents over emails, personal relationships, or minor missteps, they simultaneously rallied to shield Trump from accountability over far more serious allegations, ranging from obstruction of justice to mishandling classified documents. This type of hypocrisy not only reveals the selective application of outrage but also demonstrates how loyalty to party and power outweighs any genuine commitment to principles of justice or fairness. Crockett's confrontation cut deep because it called attention to this imbalance in real time, showing how figures like Bondi play a role in perpetuating it by going on television to deflect, distract, or reframe these scandals. Ethics is another area where this double standard is consistently exposed. Republicans frequently present themselves as guardians of traditional values, painting Democrats as morally corrupt or out of touch with real American ideals. Yet, when scandals involving their own members arise, whether related to personal misconduct, ethical violations in office, or conflicts of interest, the same party that lectures about morality suddenly finds ways to excuse or minimize the behavior. Crockett's words rang true because she laid bare the contradiction of a party that elevates itself as a moral authority while refusing to hold its own accountable. By calling out this inconsistency, she challenged the narrative that only one side of the political spectrum is prone to corruption or scandal, instead making it clear that the difference lies in how each side addresses wrongdoing when it occurs. Selective outrage is perhaps the most visible manifestation of this hypocrisy, because it plays out in real time through speeches, media appearances, and political theatrics. Republicans will erupt in fury over certain issues when they can be tied to Democrats, using them as rallying cries to energize their base. However, when the exact same issue emerges within their own party, suddenly the outrage vanishes, replaced by rationalizations or complete silence. Crockett's rant gained traction precisely because it highlighted these moments of silence, pointing out that they are not mere oversights but calculated strategies. This form of selective outrage is what fuels much of the disillusionment with politics today, as ordinary citizens can clearly see the bias and manipulation involved in deciding what deserves attention and what does not. One of the reasons this hypocrisy resonates so strongly with audiences is that it confirms what many already suspect, that principles are often just a tool used for political convenience rather than genuine beliefs. Crockett's fiery approach worked because it stripped away the polite veneer that usually surrounds these conversations. She named the hypocrisy directly, without hesitation, and in doing so gave voice to the frustration of people who are tired of watching the same double standards play out again and again. Her willingness to confront Bondi, who often embodies this pattern through her appearances on Fox News, made the critique even more pointed, because it was aimed not just at the abstract idea of GOP hypocrisy but at someone actively perpetuating it in the public sphere. The effects of this hypocrisy are not limited to the political elite, they filter down to the public and create a climate of cynicism and distrust. When voters see leaders loudly condemning their opponents for actions while excusing their allies for the same behavior, they begin to lose faith in the very concept of accountability. That erosion of trust weakens democracy because it leads people to disengage, to believe that all politicians are equally corrupt, and to abandon the idea that the system can ever be fair. Crockett's rant struck a chord because it connected the dots between hypocrisy at the top and disillusionment among the people, showing how selective outrage is not just a strategy but a poison that undermines the foundation of civic life. It is also important to recognize how media outlets like Fox News amplify and protect this hypocrisy. By choosing which stories to highlight and which to ignore, they help craft the selective outrage that Republicans rely on. When a Democrat makes a misstep, the coverage is wall-to-wall, filled with panels, commentaries, and repeated demands for consequences. When a Republican does the same or worse, the story is downplayed, reframed, or dismissed altogether. Crockett's confrontation with Bondi tied this directly to the broader issue of GOP hypocrisy, because it showed how media allies are complicit in maintaining the double standard. Without that amplification, the hypocrisy might be more difficult to sustain, but with it, the pattern becomes deeply entrenched in the minds of millions of viewers. The courage it takes to confront this dynamic should not be underestimated. By calling out hypocrisy so publicly, Crockett risked backlash not only from her political opponents but also from the media machine that supports them. Yet, her determination to expose these double standards demonstrated her belief that the truth must be spoken, no matter the consequences. That courage is what made her words so powerful, because they were not tempered or cautious, they were raw, direct, and unflinching. This boldness made the hypocrisy impossible to ignore, at least for those willing to listen. In exposing the GOP's double standards on accountability, ethics, and selective outrage, Crockett revealed the deeper problem facing American politics, a system where principles are often weaponized for partisan gain rather than upheld for the common good. By pointing out this hypocrisy so clearly, she not only held her opponents to account but also challenged the public to recognize the patterns at play and demand something better from their leaders. Jasmine Crockett's fiery rant represents not just personal passion, but a broader fight for truth, fairness, and resistance against intimidation in American politics, and that distinction is what makes her words so significant. While many political confrontations are remembered as moments of personal animosity or partisan spectacle, this one carries weight because it embodies a larger struggle that is being waged in the halls of Congress, on television screens, and across social media platforms. Crockett was not simply expressing anger for its own sake, she was standing in defiance of a system where voices are often drowned out by misinformation, threats, and hypocrisy. Her intensity reflected the frustration of millions who feel the political landscape has become poisoned by dishonesty and manipulation, and in channeling that frustration, she turned her rant into a statement of resistance that transcended her own individuality. The fight for truth is one of the clearest themes that emerges from Crockett's confrontation. In a time when disinformation spreads faster than facts, when media platforms elevate sensational claims over evidence, and when powerful figures benefit from shaping false narratives, the act of insisting on truth becomes radical. Crockett's refusal to let Bondi or others define the conversation on their terms was, at its core, a fight to reclaim the truth from those who distort it. This matters because the erosion of truth is one of the greatest dangers facing democratic societies today. Without a shared understanding of reality, the public cannot hold leaders accountable, cannot debate policies honestly, and cannot build consensus. By inserting her unfiltered honesty into the conversation, Crockett was doing more than arguing with an opponent, she was drawing a line in the sand against a culture of falsehoods that threatens the very foundations of governance. Fairness is another element of the broader fight Crockett embodied. In politics, fairness is often sacrificed in favor of power, with rules bent or selectively enforced depending on who benefits. Crockett's rant made it clear that this imbalance cannot be ignored, because fairness is not just a lofty ideal, it is a practical necessity for any functioning democracy. When politicians and media figures wield double standards, demanding accountability from one side while shielding their own from consequences, they strip the system of legitimacy. Crockett's anger was rooted in the recognition that fairness has been eroded by those who would rather win than play by consistent rules. By calling this out, she tapped into the sense of injustice that so many feel when they see corruption go unpunished or lies rewarded. Her passion thus became a rallying cry for those who demand a system where fairness is not optional but essential. Resistance against intimidation is perhaps the most powerful layer of Crockett's fiery stance. In today's political climate, threats against public officials, journalists, and activists have become disturbingly common, fueled by inflammatory rhetoric and amplified by media echo chambers. The goal of this intimidation is clear: to silence dissent, to make critics think twice before speaking out, and to create an environment where only certain voices dominate the narrative. Crockett's refusal to be silenced, even in the face of hostility, represented a direct challenge to this culture of fear. She showed that resistance is possible, that standing firm in the face of threats is not only an act of personal courage but also a statement of collective defiance. For those who have felt powerless in the face of intimidation, her fiery words offered an example of how to push back, loudly and unapologetically. What makes Crockett's stance even more important is that it connects with a broader movement for accountability and justice. Across the country, people are demanding that politicians and media figures be held to higher standards, that corruption be confronted rather than excused, and that fairness and truth be restored as guiding principles. Crockett's rant fits into this movement because it does not exist in isolation. It echoes the frustration and determination of activists, voters, and citizens who are tired of being manipulated. Her personal passion, therefore, becomes symbolic of a collective energy that is building across political and social spheres. By speaking so boldly, she became a vessel for those voices, amplifying their concerns in a space where they are often ignored. Her approach also demonstrates the power of emotion in political discourse. Too often, political speech is stripped of authenticity, reduced to carefully scripted talking points designed to avoid controversy. Crockett's fiery rant broke that mold by embracing passion and raw emotion, and in doing so, she reached people on a deeper level. Audiences respond not just to facts but to the conviction with which those facts are delivered. By showing anger, frustration, and determination, Crockett communicated that the stakes are not abstract but personal, urgent, and real. This authenticity is part of what makes her resistance so compelling, because it contrasts sharply with the calculated performances of those who rely on rehearsed outrage rather than genuine conviction. Crockett's stance also highlights the intersection of gender and race in politics, where women, particularly women of color, often face disproportionate scrutiny and intimidation. Her refusal to back down in such a high-profile confrontation is significant because it challenges the stereotypes that attempt to silence or diminish voices like hers. By speaking with fire and refusing to be intimidated, she not only defended herself but also symbolized the struggles of countless others who face systemic attempts to marginalize them. Her resistance becomes all the more powerful in this context, because it sends a message that the old tactics of silencing and intimidation will not succeed. The broader implications of her fiery rant extend into the way people think about leadership itself. Leadership is not only about drafting legislation or negotiating deals, it is also about setting an example of courage, integrity, and resilience. Crockett's performance in this confrontation showed that leaders can and should speak truth to power, even when it is uncomfortable or risky. Her willingness to do so inspires others to expect more from their representatives, to demand leaders who will fight for fairness and truth rather than simply maintain the status quo. In this sense, her passion is not just a personal attribute but a model of leadership that prioritizes authenticity and courage. Her resistance also underscores the importance of challenging dominant media narratives. In a landscape where networks like Fox News hold significant influence, it is easy for certain perspectives to dominate while others are sidelined. Crockett's decision to speak out against Bondi, who is closely aligned with that network, was an act of reclaiming space in the conversation. It demonstrated that those narratives can be resisted, that they are not inevitable, and that pushing back against them is necessary to create a more balanced public discourse. By doing so, she reminded audiences that media power is not absolute, it can be contested, and truth can still break through the noise when delivered with conviction. Jasmine Crockett's fiery rant ultimately embodies a spirit of resistance that goes beyond her own political career. It represents the collective desire for a politics grounded in truth, fairness, and courage rather than fear, intimidation, and hypocrisy. Her willingness to fight on these fronts, to speak passionately and unapologetically, connects her to a tradition of leaders who have used their voices not only to defend themselves but to stand for something larger than themselves. In her words and her fire, she captured the essence of what it means to resist, to fight back, and to demand a better standard for American politics.